I want to share the best technique that I've learned in some time to respond to loneliness, depression, unhappiness, anxiety, and PTSD. So, in referencing, a great technique, we have to start with the diagnosis or what we're remedying. A hammer is a fabulous technique for a nail, but not so much for floating in a swimming pool, right? And so we have to start with the goal. And I would say that the technique that I'm going to share is particularly good with looped negative thoughts. So looped negative thoughts are one of the primary sources of depression. I want this, it'll never work out, or it'll never work out, what's the point of wanting it? That creates more depression than less depression, because depression just de-energizes. Why would you energize a system that is doomed to failure? I'm unlovable, for example. If you think that thought, you will feel worse and you will feel lonely, because in order to believe that belief, you have to project a future in which you are not loved, and you have to project a present in which you are not loved. And unfortunately, in the rabid materialism that is rampant in our cult, the fact that no particular human, I don't know how to love myself, and this person doesn't know how to love me, and this person doesn't know how to love me, and this one doesn't know how to love me, because that's all unlovability means. It means that no one present appears to have the willingness and competency to love. And if they do, then one is lovable. And if no one does, then one is unlovable by definition, if you define yourself with the circle of experience around you. But of course, just because no one around you is loving you does not mean the earth is not loving you. If love is defined by facilitating survival and security of survival, you don't have that without the earth. So there's if love is correlated with assisting a human being in fulfilling their needs, then the planet is always loving us for as long as we are alive, right? At the very least, right? Then who knows about the limitations of non-physical consciousness, of whether it's deities or plant consciousness or animal consciousness or divine consciousness, or various Buddhist monks that are sending love and blessing to all beings, right? So we have to be very narrow in order to take the 10 or 20 people in our life that are doing an inadequate job of loving us to conclude that we are unlovable. But if the need is for certainty, and that is one of our human needs, is for a certain amount of certainty to protect against the unknown. If the need is for certainty, and it seems like everyone in our world is not loving us, it can be more certain and thus meet that need to say that no one and nothing can love us. But nevertheless, to believe that I am unlovable is a depressing thought. It's an unhappy thought. It does not bring well-being. And if you are unlovable, then there is nothing you can do to be loved because you are unlovable, right? And so there's lots of those types of thoughts that create anxiety, fear, depression, loneliness, sadness, despair, anger, irritation, and then with all of the spiritual judgment about anger and irritation, etc. Spiritual people don't do that. Then then you can get depressed that now you're even going to be more unloved by all those spiritual people who don't love angry people because they judge them instead. And so now now all those spiritual people are people who are claiming to be spiritual. They're not going to love you either because now you're angry that nobody's loving you. And so there's endless stuff around that. And so what I'm going to be talking about is a remedy. I would say it's one of the best sustainable remedies that I know. Now, when evaluating the best, like what is an ideal medicine? Well, let's look at the best possible medicine we could imagine. So costs trillions of dollars or is absolutely free. So obviously free medicine is as good as it gets, right? It takes, 10 years to be effective or a trillion years. There might be some medicine that just slowly works away on core issues for a trillion years. Of course, you're long dead. Or you could have instant medicine. That would be the best. Well, this is medicine that takes effect within 5 to 15 minutes. So pretty close to perfect medicine on that area. Then requires specialized equipment, cranes, labs, MRI machines costing hundreds of thousands of dollars, or requires no specialized equipment. So it's absolutely perfect in that domain. And requires a PhD, a special a permit, right? A government permit, right? So 0 government permits, no PhD required, no high school diploma required. Anyone can do this. Is bad for the body, has side effects, right? You can happily lose weight. You just may get get a brain tumor, do this, do that, have anal leakage, but no side effects, right? So obviously, free, 5 to 15 minutes of effective, effective response. And then it has a small response or a major response. Well, my experience is a 300 to 500% shift. So we're talking about 300 to 500% in pain reduction in these areas. Not bad. There's plenty of areas where a 20 to 50% reduction in pain is the best medicine out there. And then, is it addictive? The best medicine would be not addictive. A worse medicine would be highly addictive and have side effects, right? That you then have to deal with and be very expensive and all that. So no side effects, no addiction. Has to be, you have to fly to the Canary Islands to a specialized lab. No, can be done anywhere, right? So incredible. So this is why I'm referring to it as the best medicine that I've come across in a while. And it's surprising, meaning I am surprised, having been practicing this medicine for a little bit, I am surprised at how good it is. I would not have guessed that. And that's why I'm making this video, is you probably didn't guess it either. So what is the medicine? What's the remedy? And why does it work, right? So let's go to what the medicine is. The medicine is 15 minutes, 15 minutes of conscious breathing twice a day. That's it, right? Incredibly simple. But what's going on here and why is it working? Well, the first thing to understand is that who we are is comprised of 2 parts, right? We are a synergy. And on this side, we have the witness. The witness transcends thought, transcends identity. It is outside of time and space. It simply witnesses. And then we have the ego. And the ego is the part of us that attaches, that defines itself by our identity. And our identity is constructed of our patterns of thinking, feeling, speaking, doing, and being. And I would say that our patterns of thinking are primary in our cult because we are a cult based on Cartesian logic, lineal, rational thought, right? And so a lot of what we do starts with what we think. We think this is a good idea, that's why we're doing it, right? A lot of what we feel begins with a thought, right? Meaning that they're not dissociated. We don't think I'm unlovable and then say, I'm so excited, right? No, we think a thought and then we go down, right? Our feelings respond. If it's a negative, painful thought, then our feelings go down. And then the ego says, that's me. I am the thoughts. I am the feelings. I am the sensation. And then our sensations, right? Our way of being. Like, we don't, get more excited on our walk because we're unlovable and feeling depressed. We start looking down, right? And then the physiology supports the feelings, because when we look down, then it emphasizes the feelings. And the feelings give justification to the thought, see how unlovable I am. And then look at me just in the stoop here, right? I'm so unlovable. Who would love, this depressed, unlovable person, right? And so the thought is a very important seed out of which feelings and posture and behavior emerge. And then our reality gets strengthened and shaped by our behavior, our posture, our feelings, our vibe, and what we're thinking, right? And so, if we say, I'm really not very much fun, I'm depressed, I'm unlovable, and then we go like this and we don't make eye contact, usually that's an infectious vibe. Usually other people will then agree with us and say, that's a depressed, unlovable person, right? Now, the cult program that says that you don't love people who are depressed and lonely is just what it is, a cult program, and it isn't particularly personal. You could live in a cult that when people look down, you did dances together, and then the energy might shift, right? Or you grieved together and there was a bonding and there was less loneliness and less shame. But then you would have to have an emotionally literate cult that understood the biology of grief, that understood the science of empathy, that prioritized it, that you'd have to have an emotionally intelligent cult to respond with competent empathy when you saw someone lonely and depressed. We have a sociopathic and emotionally illiterate cult. So when we see someone looking sad, scared, regressed, lonely, and often not taking care of themselves, because why would you take care of an unlovable person? And the person is believing that cult program, that they're unlovable. So they're not taking care. Everyone avoids them. And so they all confirm that that's an unlovable person because nobody loves them. They don't love themselves, and nobody else loves them. And so the identity that the ego has attached to has now been strengthened, and the entire cult has participated in the dynamic. You now have a certified, unhappy, lonely, unlovable person, right? That everyone has agreed not to love, and to shame and to blame and to avoid, right? Because that's what cults do. Everyone does one thing. That's what makes it a cult, right? If half the people loved our homeless people and half the people shamed them, it wouldn't be quite as cult-like, would it? Right? You have to have, the vast majority of people all have to agree to do the same thing, even if that thing is absolutely insane and counterproductive. That's what makes a cult a cult. and every culture has its root word, cult. Every culture is based on cult memes. We all agree to do this and this because that's what we do. That's what makes it a cult. So, and so then you have an unlovable person. So you have the ego that identifies it, says, that's me. I'm the unlovable person. I'm the one who thinks this. I'm the one who feels this. I'm the one who stoops like this. I'm the one that people look away from, and I'm the one that nobody invites. That's me. I'm that, right? And it's not a lot of fun to be wrapped in a shame-based, pain-based, trauma-based identity with the ego saying, that's me. And I believe that's the way it'll be, right? Because that's the way it is. That's the way cults work. It is this way. That's why it should be that way. That's why it is that way. That's why it was that way. That's why nobody ever loves me, right? So that's all of that stuff. And it's all coming from the cult, but then in our weaker moments or in our innocence, we take it on. We say, I guess that's what this cult is based on. And so we take it on. Now, the ego has no solution to this, right? Tries to be more lovable. That didn't work. That didn't work. It's pointless. It doesn't. The ego is trapped within its own identity because it clings to the identity. The ego would rather be miserable in a secure, miserable, clear identity of misery than be uncertain, right? Maybe I'm lovable. Maybe I'm not. I have no idea. The ego doesn't like that. The ego wants to know what its boundaries are. And so it tends to look for certainty. And one of the most certain things that the ego can find are negative beliefs and painful experiences. They seem very solid to the ego. And so that's me. I'm unlovable. And so that's the trap, right? Because if you try and say, well, maybe I am lovable. Now the ego doesn't quite know who it is, right? Am I lovable or am I not lovable? I want to know. Well, maybe I'm lovable. Well, which is it? Am I lovable or I'm not lovable? Well, if you're going to pick one or the other, and this person didn't love you here, and that person didn't love you there, and that person didn't love you there, and there's this painful feeling in your body and feels unloving, and so I'm unlovable. That's it. So the ego likes simplicity because it's clarity of boundary. Like I exist, says the ego, right? I am an unlovable person. I'm not a maybe I'm unlovable, I am, right? I've got clarity. And there is a deep need in identities to be clear. And it's one of the reasons that there's so much racism, sexism, ageism. There is an incredible amount of cruelty by groups of people who attack, hate, and ostracize other groups of people for the crime of being different. You can go online on a dating site, and I don't want to date people of this age group, and I don't want to date people of that age group. I don't even want to meet them, right? You could have the most entertaining experience of your life. I don't care. They're different. I want people in this age group. I want people in this gender, and I want people with this sexual preference. And I want people that want to have 2 kids. And I don't even want to meet the others. I want someone like me. That's what I want. That's who I am. I am the one who thinks this is a good idea, who feels this, and who wants this. And I want to find someone who agrees with me that I'm right. And I don't want to meet someone from another race, another religion, even if they're happier, even if they're more successful, even if they're more interesting. Go fuck them. Get out of here. Get out of here. I want someone from my religion and my this and my that, and I want them to be interesting. Why aren't you as interesting as this Buddhist over here or this person over here? Why aren't you being this way, like me, but exciting and healthy and all that and interesting, which I'm not, right? I'm scared and nervous and all this stuff, but I want them to be like me, but very happy, and successful and helpful. Like I'm not helpful to other people who need help, but I want someone who's really happy and who helps me to be happy, who's like me in every area except that I don't do that. I'm not going around and saying, are you unhappy? Can I help you? But I want someone to do that to me. And then it'll be certain, it'll be familiar because, it's certain and familiar. And that's what I want, says the ego. And it'll be very comfortable. And you are different and you're different. And that's not me. And I don't know what that's about. And I'm very uncomfortable with that. What do you mean you're looking at me for 1 minute? You're supposed to glance at me and then look off and glance back slightly, because that's what I do, right? And you're just gazing at me. What are you doing? Are you a creep? You're gazing at me. Why? Why? Stop being different than me. This is the cult where we glance at each other and little this, little that, and pretend we're not interested when we're really interested. We're in that cult. And so don't ruin it by being different. And if you do, we'll kill you. We'll lynch you. Genocide, wars, etc. They're different from us. They're threatening my identity, my freedom to be me, the way I know myself to be in my misery. I want to hang on to that. Every change out there is a threat, right? They updated my app. I didn't want that. I didn't want that. I didn't want that, right? Who's changing my things? And so that's the ego. So how can the ego change its thoughts and become uncertain? It can't, right? It's not built for that. It's built to define itself and hang on. Now, the witness is the part of us that is free. So that's the ego binding to identity. But you see, if the identity is sick, and what do I mean by that? Your thoughts and the feelings they produce and the body sensations they produce and the life choices those produce are making you sick, meaning you are in pain, mentally, emotionally, spiritually, physically, sexually. It's not going beautifully. It's not going gracefully. You're not in a light and state that you enjoy being in. And the ego doesn't mind as long as it can hang on to its identity. But you mind, right? There's some part of you that's beyond the ego that would like to be enjoying life, would like to be happy. But how can I do that and be miserable at the same time? You can't, right? So the question is, how do you get from the ego to the witness? Now, the witness is bigger than the ego. So the ego doesn't like that because we're talking about the death of the ego to a certain extent. Meaning when you're present in your witness, you are not bound to the limits of your ego. Now, the critic is a part of the ego. I look at that and I criticize it. That's not witnessing it. And looking at it and I'm criticizing it. That's my habit of thinking, feeling, speaking, doing, and being. To be present for something is to witness it. Thoughts are not present. Feelings are not present. Sensations are not present, right? They're coming out of the thoughts and the feelings, right? But to truly open up the space of the witness is the biggest part of us, right? It's the self. You have the I, the ego, and you have the self, the container that holds the ego, that witnesses, not only itself, but everything else. The witness doesn't judge. The witness doesn't criticize. The witness doesn't think, doesn't feel. It is a space in which the ego exists. And so when you're dealing with a sick identity, a pattern of thinking, feeling, speaking, doing, and being that is self-referential, we're holding on to it because that's what egos do. They hold on to anything. That's me, I'm the one doing this. That's me. We're moving beyond that by witnessing it, right? And the question, and the ego doesn't think highly of the witness, right? Most egos don't, particularly Western egos do not think highly of the witness. It's feminine, for one, right? The witness is the one that gives birth to the ego and all the identities. It's the womb, right? So the witness is feminist, is a feminine side in both male and female. So in a chauvinistic cult, where we all agree to value masculine traits, that's what are you thinking? Not how are you witnessing. Nobody says, what have you been witnessing lately? How many minutes a day have you been witnessing? I've never heard that in my entire life. What did you think about this? What did you think about that, right? So that's the masculine component of an individual, the ego. I think this. Well, I think that. It's divisive, right? Nobody thinks exactly the same thing, in the same way, for the same reasons, at the same time. If you dive deeply enough, thoughts always divide. Well, I think this one should be before that. Well, I think this should be before. We're in agreement in the goal, but I think we should get there by this and this and this. And you think we should get there in this and this and this. And I think I should be the leader, and you think you should be the leader, right? So it's thoughts break things apart, but witnessing and presence unify, right? There's no distinction because it's not a state of language. And the ego doesn't trust it, right? It's like, I've got to solve this, I've got to solve that, right? And the witness isn't coming up with solutions, right? The witness isn't saying, I've got to, do this and do that. That's the critic or the judge or the boss in the personality structure. So how do we get to the witness? And it turns out that conscious breathing, that in order to, first of all, we want to interrupt the identity, the sick identity, the identity that's causing us suffering. We want to interrupt it so that there is space for a new thought, for a new feeling, for a new sensation to emerge out of the witness, out of the self, out of the space. And the ego is insecure. Where am I going to be? Like, am I going to die? Whatever. Well, the ego can then attach to the new thing once it comes in, right? But you want to let go of, it's like, this is my meal. Yeah, but it's moldy. It's sick. Every time you take a bite, it makes you feel miserable. But it's mine. It's my food. I ordered this. This is me. I always eat moldy broccoli, right? That's me. Yeah, but if we let it go for a little bit, maybe a new dish will arrive that's fresh from the oven, right? And then you can bind and say, that's me, right? Well, the ego just wants to hold on to something. And what it likes is stuff that is familiar. And unfortunately for traumatized people, what's most familiar to the ego is pain and suffering. And so it wants that. So it's a big kind of exercise in trust for the ego to let go for 15 minutes. Like, it would have you believe that your life would literally fall apart if it's not running everything the exact way it normally does for 15 minutes. Well, the ego can get away with that if you're in a traffic situation and, an emergency is happening. But, life-threatening emergencies, once you've, exited a traumatic terrain, are not happening every 15 minutes. So this is something to do once you can responsibly take 15 minutes, right? And if you really can't do that in the next 24 hours, there will be a time before you die, most likely, when you do have 15 minutes where you would normally watch TV, do this, do that, chat with someone you don't like on WhatsApp, whatever. There's going to be a time when you could do this, right? And that's the time to do it. It's not the time the ego wants to do it, because what if it changes me? Well, what if I become different, right? The ego's terrified of losing its familiarity, its certainty of knowing who it is, right? If you've been miserable for a while, then the ego is very clear what it's like to be miserable, but it's not very clear of what it's like to be joyful, what it's like to be happy. And so that's what we're doing with this technique. And so it's very simple. It turns out that you cannot consciously be present to a breath and think at the same time. Amazing. You cannot be completely conscious and present at the same time as you're thinking. So it's a little bit like this trick, right? You can't kind of rub and do that in opposite direction and do that. It's very difficult, right? Well, it's very difficult to consciously breathe and be totally present to the breath and think anything. So that's the trick. That's the medicine, right? That's how the identity is interrupted, suspended. And it's at the same moment that your body is revitalized with oxygen, right? So your body, when you're worrying, you are holding your breath. You are controlling your breath. You are breathing shallowly. You cannot worry, control things, make plans, figure out how to solve problems, and breathe deeply and fully. You cannot do that, right? So the anxiety, the depression, is controlling the breath by interrupting it in a variety of ways that contributes to deoxygenation of the body. So you're just reversing that cycle. That's what's making you sick. So you're reversing the cycle. So let's do this together. See if you're willing to do this free, simple technique. It's far more interesting to the ego to talk about all these ideas, but that's comfortable terrain in many cases because you're thinking, right? And that's me, says the ego. I can barely be aware of my hand, but even the thought about it interrupts the breath. So we come back to the breath. I am happier and more energized in that last 30 seconds than in the entirety of this video. Now the question is, how about you, right? Can you do it? First of all, just be 100% present. Now the technique is this. There's no pausing. It's continuous. You go consciously up to your top and then directly down. You might go a little faster than normal, but you don't have to. You just have to be present each step of the way. And if you are totally present with the breath, you cannot think a single thought. And the only thought that's worth thinking if you lose yourself in thought is back to the breath. And as soon as you're back to the breath, you cannot think again. You have successfully interrupted the identity of the ego, and in that physiological emotional change. But she left me. And she stole my things. I mean, how can you be happy here thinking that, right? And that means I'm unlovable. This person didn't respond to my invitation. That person judged me. And she left me, and she stole my things. I mean, how can you possibly smile with that thought? Now, you can easily smile, but not with that thought. You can't smile with that thought. See, and the trouble with the ego's bind, and this is what we're just doing, we're not getting rid of the ego, by the way. We're not going, in the middle of a busy life on retreat for 10 years, right? Refusing to leave the office, pay the bills, any of that. No. We're doing this for 15 minutes. I don't know if you noticed the physiological change in me. I did. For free, in less than 5 minutes. The best I've felt in this whole video. For free. No going to a therapy, no side effects, no anal leakage, right? I mean, you can eat Pringles. They taste very crispy, etc. Just might be anal leakage, This is free. It's not fattening. you have to be absolutely insane, which of course our egos are. The ego just says that's not what we do. That's weird. What does weird mean? It means it's different. And different than what? Than me. Yeah, but isn't that the point? That you want to be different than you? You're miserable, right? Hey, get it together. So, that's it. It's perfectly easy. Now, after you change your physiology, and for 15 minutes of whatever it is that comes down, tears, sadness, sleep, whatever, you just go through that, let it out, come back to it, back to the breath. 15 minutes in the morning and 15 minutes at the end of the day, towards the end of the day. I do it in my tub sometimes. I do it walking sometimes. I do it since my morning meditation, that's a recorded meditation, my mind usually ignores the meditation and starts busily worrying about, oh, this is going to happen, and that, and then what if that? I've got to quickly text that person so that thing doesn't happen, because if that happens, then that will happen, and oh my goodness, right? I can't meditate, right? So I'm often busy doing that while I'm listening to a guided meditation, because the guided meditation doesn't take all my attention. But with the breath, I can't fully focus on the guided meditation either, but I feel great because I've totally interrupted those thoughts. Yoga has a similar type of impact when I did yoga for 20 minutes, but it's easier to get caught because at those tension points in the yoga, you can think about things, right? This is continual, steady breathing. And the discipline is to start with a week. If you can do 30 minutes a week, 15 minutes in the morning, 15 minutes in the evening, and accept and allow all the energy that flows through when you're not blocking the grief, blocking the tension, and just let it come through, and accept that that's life, energy moving through you. That's what breath is. That's what life is. Clearing out of the body, etc. There's nothing wrong with you, and there's nothing wrong with breath, right? Well, the ego has all these things. This is wrong with me because of that and that. But if you're present, and the thoughts are suspended, there's nothing wrong with that, right? You can come back and come up with all these horrible things. You and other people are all to blame, etc. Later, after you've suspended it for 15 minutes, if you want to. Or as you come back, you may have a different perspective, and you may be comfortable with that. The ego may say, okay, well, it's not so bad. I didn't know what was going to happen. It was unknown, but that's not a bad idea. I'll do that. Or I'll change, right? And that's how reality changes. That's how reality changes. The ego tries something new, realizes it doesn't die. It never does, right? Just has some new pattern of thinking, feeling, speaking, doing, and being to adjust to. And so I offer it to you as something given to me. I'm listening to a book called The Presence Process. It's on Audible. And that's kind of led me into this. Now, I'm giving you the version of it that my ego likes, right? So if you like the version that author's ego likes, read The Presence Principle. And there's also more structure in that, But what I just told you works incredibly well for me. And in the comments below, if you give it a try in a week, share the ups and downs, whatever your ego thinks is the pros and cons of this approach. If you give it a go, right? Blessings.